The first gunshot shattered the glass above Claire Whitmore's head. A row of handmade cheese wheels exploded behind her, sending pale fragments across the tasting room like broken porcelain. Customers screamed. A little boy dropped his paper sample cup and froze beneath the long wooden counter. Claire did not think. She threw herself over him. A second bullet struck the brass bell beside the door. Outside, black SUVs slid across the snow-covered parking lot, doors opening before the vehicles had fully stopped. Men in dark coats spilled into the storm with weapons drawn, and through the broken front window came Antonio Ricci. He moved with terrifying calm. Snow clung to the shoulders of his black wool coat. His face was expressionless, but his eyes found Claire immediately curled around the trembling child beneath the counter, and something lethal changed inside them. "Down," he ordered. Claire stared at the pistol in his hand. She had known Antonio was dangerous. She had known he was lying about being only a wealthy businessman. But she had never seen a man shot through the shoulder and continue walking as if pain were merely an inconvenience. Blood darkened his white shirt beneath the coat. He stepped between Claire and the broken window just as another burst of gunfire tore through the tasting room. His body covered hers. His hand closed around the back of her neck, pulling her against his chest while glass rained over them. "Antonio, do not move." His voice was calm enough to be intimate. Outside, his men returned fire toward the tree line. One of Claire's barns had caught fire, orange flames climbing through the snowfall. Cows bellowed in terror from the adjoining pasture. Antonio looked toward the burning building. Then he looked at the blood spreading across his chest. "Get the animals out first," he told his men. His lieutenant stared at him. "Boss, you've been hit." "I said save her animals." Only then did Claire understand the truth. The most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast had come to Vermont with enough armed men to begin a war, and every one of them was taking orders from the quiet stranger she had forced to eat free cheese samples 3 months earlier. 3 months before the shooting, Antonio Ricci had entered Whitmore Family Creamery wearing shoes worth more than Claire's delivery truck. She noticed the shoes first. They were polished black leather, perfectly clean despite the mud outside. The man wearing them looked equally out of place among the pine shelves, handwritten signs, and red-checkered curtains of her family's tasting room. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with broad shoulders beneath a charcoal overcoat. His dark hair was combed neatly back from a severe face that appeared designed for old portraits and courtroom warnings. A silver watch gleamed at his wrist. 2 men waited near the entrance. They wore dark suits and the watchful expressions of men who had not come to Vermont for cheddar. Claire stood behind the counter, cutting samples of maple smoked Gouda for a retired couple from Albany. The stranger surveyed the crowded room. Families shuffled along the sample line. Children held toothpicks and debated whether the herb chèvre tasted like grass. Local farmers warmed their hands around paper cups of cider. Everyone waited their turn. The stranger did not. He walked directly to Claire. "I would like to purchase your reserve cellar collection." His voice was low, refined, and faintly Italian-American. Claire continued arranging cheese cubes on a wooden board. "The reserve collection is available after the tasting." "I'm not here for a tasting. Everyone gets the tasting." One of his men shifted near the door. The stranger looked at the line behind him as though it were a curious rural obstacle. "I know what I want. That makes one of us." The retired woman in front of Claire hid a smile. The stranger's gaze returned to Claire. It moved over her flour-dusted apron, her chestnut braid, and the curves her winter dress did not conceal. His stare was not insulting. It was worse. It was observant. Claire had spent much of her life being judged before speaking. Some people saw a woman too soft for hard farm work. Others saw a body they believed they had permission to discuss. This man looked at her as if committing every detail to memory. He removed a black card from his wallet. "I will pay double." Claire placed the next sample board in front of him. 4 cubes waited in a neat row. Sharp farmhouse cheddar, maple smoked Gouda, ash-ripened goat cheese, Alpine Reserve. His eyes lowered to the board. "I said I'll pay extra. And I said everyone tastes the samples. I don't require free food. It isn't charity. What is it? Hospitality." Something flickered across his face. It vanished so quickly Claire wondered whether she had imagined it. Behind him, a little girl tugged on her mother's coat. "Mommy, why does that man get to cut?" Claire folded her arms. The stranger glanced back at the child. Then, without another word, he moved to the end of the line. The room became strangely quiet. His two companions followed him. The one looked as if he would rather be arrested. 20 minutes later, the stranger reached Claire's counter again. She offered him the first toothpick. Cheddar. He tasted it. Claire watched his expression remain perfectly controlled. Well, it is acceptable. An elderly farmer beside him snorted. That means he likes it. Claire presented the Gouda. The stranger tried that too. His eyes narrowed slightly. Smoked over sugar maple. She explained. My father's recipe. He understood restraint. The observation surprised her. Most customers said sweet, smoky, or delicious. This man spoke as if judging a treaty. She handed him the ash-ripened goat cheese. He regarded the grey rind suspiciously. Claire lifted a brow. For the first time, humor almost touched his mouth. He ate it. Then came the Alpine Reserve, aged 18 months in the stone cellar beneath the barn. He tasted it slowly. Something changed. Not softness. Not yet. Recognition. The cheese carried flavors of toasted hazelnut, wild grass, and the cold mineral air of the mountains. Claire had helped make that wheel during the final autumn of her father's life. The stranger swallowed. This one. Good choice. I'll take the entire wheel. You'll take a wedge. His eyes sharpened. Why? Because Mrs. Daly's anniversary dinner is tomorrow, and she already reserved half. The local inn needs £6 for Christmas service, and a schoolteacher from Montpelier has been saving for a piece since October. I will compensate all of them. They don't want compensation. They want the cheese. I'm offering you substantially more than the listed price. And I'm telling you money doesn't make your dinner more important than theirs. The room fell silent again. The stranger studied her. Claire's pulse began to climb, but she refused to look away. She did not know who he was. She only knew that powerful men often expected the world to rearrange itself around their wallets. Her father had taught her differently. A good cheese wheel was divided by hunger, promise, and fairness, not status. Finally, the stranger slipped the black card back into his wallet. One wedge, then. Claire wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with twine. Name? Antonio. She waited. Ricci. She wrote it on the paper. Enjoy it, Mr. Ricci. He took the package, but did not leave. Do you refuse every profitable opportunity? Only the insulting ones. His companions became very still. Antonio's dark gaze held hers. Then, to Claire's astonishment, he inclined his head. Until next time, Miss Whitmore. She had not told him her name. By the time she looked toward the window, Antonio Ricci and his black SUVs had disappeared into the falling snow. That night, Claire searched his name. The results made her lock the creamery doors twice. Antonio Ricci was officially the chief executive of Ricci Maritime and Development, a private logistics empire with holdings in Boston, Providence, New York, and Montreal. Unofficially, the rumors were darker. Photographs showed him leaving courthouses surrounded by attorneys. Newspapers connected his family to illegal gambling, union control, port corruption, and unexplained disappearances. No charges had ever survived. Witnesses changed their statements. Investigators retired early. Rivals vanished. One article called him the most dangerous, untouchable man in New England. Claire sat alone at her kitchen table, while wind pressed snow against the windows. On the counter lay the extra sample board she had prepared earlier. She remembered the way Antonio had looked at the Alpine Reserve, not like a wealthy man evaluating a luxury product, like a lonely man remembering something he had buried. Her phone rang. Her older brother Daniel's name appeared on the screen. You still at the farm? He asked. I live at the farm. You know what I mean. Daniel had moved to Burlington years earlier and worked as an agricultural attorney. Since their father's death, he had repeatedly urged Claire to sell the property before the farm swallowed every dollar she earned. I'm fine, she said. North Star contacted me again. Claire's fingers tightened around the phone. North Star Agricultural Holdings had spent 6 months buying farms throughout the valley. They offered generous prices at first. When farmers refused, inspections appeared. Loans were suddenly called in. Distribution contracts vanished. What did they want? To increase their offer. The farm isn't for sale. They're offering 3 times its assessed value. No, Claire, listen to me. Mom's medical debts are still attached to the land. The aging cellar needs reinforcement. Your winter feed costs are rising. This isn't sentimental anymore. It was never sentimental. What do you call losing money to preserve Dad's dream? Our life. Daniel Sahil. North Star wants a meeting next week. At least hear them. No. You can't save the whole valley by yourself. Claire looked out toward the dark barns. No, she whispered. But I can refuse to be the first person who gives up. She ended the call. Across the road, headlights appeared between the trees. A black SUV slowed near her driveway. It remained there for several seconds. Then it drove away. Antonio returned the following Friday. He stood in line. Claire pretended not to notice the effect he had on the room. Tourists whispered. Local men watched his bodyguards. Mrs. Daly nearly dropped a basket when she recognized him from the news. When he reached the counter, Claire set out the samples. Today we have cranberry cheddar, cave, aged blue, rosemary tom, and the Alpine Reserve. I came for the Alpine, then the other three will help you appreciate it. He looked at her. She looked back. Antonio took the first toothpick. Over the following month, he returned every Friday. He always arrived at 11:15. He always wore a dark suit beneath a winter coat. He always stood in line, and Claire always made him taste every sample. At first, their conversations were brief. "This blue is too aggressive," he said one morning. "It's cheese, not a hostile negotiation. Everything is a negotiation. That explains why you look offended by breakfast." The corner of his mouth moved. Another Friday, he watched Claire give a free bag of cheese curds to a young father who quietly admitted he had forgotten his wallet. Antonio waited until the man left. You cannot operate a business by refusing money from the wealthy and giving products to people who cannot pay. We had extra curds. You also gave his daughter cider. She was cold. You know nothing about them. I knew enough. What if they were lying? Claire wiped the counter. Then they left with food instead of dignity taken from them. I can live with that. Antonio went silent. She looked up. His attention was fixed on her face. Not her body. Not the sample tray. Hair. The force of it unsettled her. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked. "For cheese. You own ships. You could import cheese from anywhere in Europe. I prefer Vermont. You had never visited this county before last month." One of his bodyguards glanced toward them. Antonio's expression did not change. "You searched me. I own a computer. And what did your computer tell you? That men who testify against you develop terrible memories." His gaze darkened. Claire's heart beat harder, but she did not step back. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. "Yes." The answer seemed to surprise him. "Yet you continue speaking to me this way. Fear and honesty aren't opposites." Antonio leaned one hand against the counter. His knuckles were scarred. "Most people believe they are. Most people probably want something from you. And you do not? I want you to stop trying to purchase the entire Alpine Reserve." His eyes lowered to her mouth for one dangerous second. "Anything else?" Claire became acutely aware of how close he stood. The room seemed quieter, smaller. "Yes." "What?" "You're holding up the line." He straightened. Behind him, Mrs. Daly grinned openly. Antonio moved aside, but as he left, he placed a small, black envelope on the counter. Inside was a receipt. The young father from earlier had a 6-month prepaid account at the creamery. Claire marched outside. Antonio was about to enter his SUV. "You can't do this." Snow spun between them. He turned. "Do what?" "Pay for that family without asking me. You gave them food. I paid for it. That isn't the point." "Then explain the point." "The point is that kindness isn't a debt that needs settling." His jaw tightened slightly. "In my experience, all debts are settled. Maybe that's your problem." His men watched her with disbelief. Antonio stepped closer. He smelled of cold air, cedar, and something darkly expensive. "What exactly do you believe my problem is, Claire?" It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his voice sent an unwelcome shiver through her. "You think generosity is another form of control. And you believe it is what?" "A gift. There is no such thing. My father gave free samples for 38 years. To attract customers. To make people feel welcome. Which increased sales. Sometimes. Then he was a poor businessman. He was a good man." Antonio's face became unreadable. Claire immediately sensed she had touched something hidden. For a moment, anger sharpened his features. Then the anger turned inward. "My father," Antonio said quietly, "was also considered a good man. What happened to him?" He trusted someone who accepted his generosity. The wind pulled loose strands of hair across Claire's face. Antonio lifted his hand. For one suspended second, she thought he might brush the hair away. His fingers stopped inches from her cheek. He lowered them. He did not survive the lesson, Antonio finished. Then he entered the SUV and left. The next North Star letter arrived on Monday. Notice of Environmental Compliance Review. Claire read it twice. The allegation claimed contaminated runoff from Whitmore Creamery had entered a tributary feeding the White River. It was impossible. Their drainage system had been inspected 4 months earlier. By Wednesday, state officials were taking soil samples near the lower pasture. By Thursday, 2 restaurants cancelled orders after receiving anonymous warnings about food safety. On Friday, Antonio did not come. Claire told herself she was relieved. She was not. The tasting room felt oddly empty, without the silent tension of his presence. At 11:15, she looked toward the door. At 11:30, she checked the parking lot. No black SUV appeared. By late afternoon, Claire felt foolish. Antonio Ricci was not her friend. He was not anything to her. He was a dangerous man who bought cheese and watched her as though every refusal made him more curious. At closing time, she found a dead fox on the front step. A North Star brochure had been pinned to its body with a silver knife. Claire froze. The winter air seemed to vanish from her lungs. Behind her, the tasting room lights suddenly went dark. She reached for her phone. A hand covered her mouth. Claire drove her elbow backward. The man grunted but held her tighter. Another figure emerged from beside the building. "Tell Whitmore to sign," he said. "Next animal won't belong to the woods." Headlights exploded across the yard. A black SUV struck the second man before he could move. He rolled across the snow. The person holding Claire released her and reached inside his coat. Antonio appeared from the darkness. He crossed the distance without running. The attacker pulled a gun. Antonio seized his wrist, twisted it with a sickening crack, and drove him against the creamery wall. The weapon fell into the snow. Antonio hit him once. Only once. The man collapsed unconscious. Claire backed against the door, shaking. More SUVs entered the yard. Antonio's men surrounded the property. 2 dragged the injured attackers away. Antonio turned toward her. There was blood on his cuff. Not his. His face remained controlled, but his breathing was too measured, as though rage had to be restrained 1 breath at a time. "Are you hurt?" Claire could not answer. He approached slowly. She flinched. Antonio stopped. The reaction struck him harder than a blow. His gaze dropped to her trembling hands. "I will not touch you," he said. She hated the fear in her body. Hated that she could not control it. "Did you know they were coming?" "I knew someone had been watching the farm." "You were watching me too?" "Yes." The answer was immediate. Claire stared at him. "For how long?" "Since the first day." Cold spread through her. "You had me followed. I had the property observed. That is the same thing." "No." "It feels the same." His jaw hardened. "The men who came tonight intended to terrorize you into signing away your land. And you think secretly surrounding me with your own men is different?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because mine would die before allowing anyone to harm you." The words settled between them. Snow drifted over the dead fox. Claire looked at Antonio's blood-stained hand. "What are you involved in?" His silence answered first. Then he glanced toward the men loading her attackers into an SUV. "North Star is not merely an agricultural corporation. I know they're corrupt. You do not know the scale. Then tell me." Antonio looked back at her. "They are financed by the Moretti family." Claire had read that name in articles about organized crime. A rival syndicate based in New York and northern New Jersey. Smuggling, extortion, construction fraud, murder. Why would a Mafia family care about Vermont farms? Land, water rights, distribution routes, isolation. For what? Facilities that should never appear on government records. Claire's stomach tightened. "And how do you know this?" Antonio held her gaze. "Because my family has been at war with them for 9 years." The world became suddenly still. "You're admitting it. I am telling you enough to keep you alive. You're a Mafia boss." His expression did not shift. Yes. The simplicity frightened her more than denial would have. Claire folded her arms around herself. You need to leave. Claire? Leave my farm. The men who came tonight, were they here because of North Star or because of you? Antonio said nothing. That's what I thought. His voice lowered. I did not bring this danger to your valley, but your war is part of it. Yes. And now they know you come here. Yes. Then every Friday you stood in my tasting room. You made me a target. A muscle tightened along his jaw. I believed my presence would discourage them. You believed wrong. I corrected the error. She looked at the unconscious man being dragged through the snow. Is that what you call this? He is alive, because you are watching. The meaning chilled her. What happens when I'm not? Antonio stepped closer, before stopping himself. Nothing happens without my permission. That isn't comforting. It was not intended to be. His eyes moved over her face, as if searching for injuries he could not see. The farm will be guarded tonight. No. This is not a request. This is my property. And those were Moretti soldiers. I don't want your armed men here. I would prefer your anger to your funeral. Claire stared at him, furious and shaken. You don't get to control me because you're afraid. Something dark and vulnerable flashed in his eyes. I am not afraid. You came through a snowstorm with 6 vehicles. I was nearby. You missed the Friday tasting for the first time in a month. His silence betrayed him. You knew something might happen, she said. You were hunting them. I was trying to identify who inside North Star ordered the intimidation. And? They report directly to Gideon Vale. Claire knew the name. Vale had appeared in magazines, smiling beside governors and speaking about sustainable agriculture. He's their CEO. He is also a Moretti financial strategist. Why are you telling me this now? Because they escalated. No. Why are you telling me anything? Why do you care what happens to one small cheese farm? Antonio looked at her with an intensity that made the winter night seem warmer and more dangerous. I have asked myself that question every day for 3 weeks. Claire's breath caught. His hand lifted again, slowly this time. She should have moved. She did not. His fingertips brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was so gentle it made the violence surrounding them feel unreal. I have not found an answer I am willing to admit, he said. Then he turned and ordered his men to secure the farm. Claire allowed the guards to remain because Mrs. Daly's husband arrived with a hunting rifle and declared that he was 74 years old and had no intention of fighting professional criminals alone. Antonio stayed in the farmhouse kitchen while Claire made coffee. Neither spoke. His men occupied the porch, barns, and perimeter. Their radios murmured beyond the windows. Antonio had removed his coat. Beneath it, his tailored black suit fit him with ruthless precision. A shoulder holster rested against his white shirt. Claire placed a mug before him. You carry a gun to buy cheese. I carry a gun to church. That doesn't make it better. I did not say it did. She sat across from him. The old kitchen had not changed much since her childhood. Copper pans hung above the stove. Her father's handwritten recipes were tucked into a wooden box. A faded photograph of Claire and Daniel stood beside the sugar bowl. Antonio studied it. You were happy. I still am sometimes. Not tonight. No. He turned the coffee cup slowly between his hands. Your brother has been communicating with North Star. Claire's head snapped up. What? Daniel Whitmore exchanged 12 calls with Gideon Vale's legal office in the past month. He's an agricultural attorney. He has also received $250,000 into a newly created consulting account. Claire went still. You're lying. I do not need to lie to you. You spy on my brother? I investigate threats. Daniel would never help them. Perhaps he believes he is helping you. Claire stood abruptly. You don't know him. No. I know frightened men. He isn't frightened. He is deeply in debt. She stared at Antonio. What debt? Sports gambling. Private bookmakers in Montreal. Nearly $400,000. That's impossible. He has hidden it well. Claire gripped the back of her chair. Daniel had been impatient about selling. Pushy. Angry. But betrayal? No. Their father had carried Daniel through the snow when he broke his ankle at 12. Daniel had worked beside Claire every summer until law school. He had cried harder than anyone at their parents' funerals. He wouldn't sell us out. Antonio Rose. He may believe the farm is already lost. That doesn't give him the right. No. She looked at the photograph again. Her voice weakened. "Do you have proof?" Antonio removed his phone, opened a file, and slid it across the table. Bank records, call logs, a draft consulting agreement between Daniel and North Star. Claire stopped reading. The room blurred. Antonio reached for her. His hand closed around her forearm, steadying her before she fell against the table. The contact sent heat through her despite everything. She looked at his fingers wrapped around her sleeve. He released her immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Claire sank into the chair. "What does Vale want Daniel to do? Convince you to sell? If that fails, testify that Whitmore Creamery knowingly violated environmental standards." He knows that isn't true. He may not need to testify. The threat could be sufficient. Tears burned behind Claire's eyes. She refused to let them fall. Antonio watched her struggle with an expression more severe than pity. "What happens now?" she asked. "I remove Gideon Vale." Claire looked at him. "You mean kill him?" "Yes." "No. He threatened you." "I don't care." "I do." "Then care differently." Antonio's eyes hardened. "You are asking me to leave alive a man who sent armed criminals to your home. I'm asking you not to commit murder because of me. It would not be only because of you. That's supposed to comfort me?" "No." He turned toward the window. Snow thickened outside. Claire studied the rigid line of his back. "Your brother," she said. Antonio became motionless. "You said the Morettas killed him." "Yes." "How?" Silence stretched. Claire expected him to refuse. Instead, he reached beneath his shirt and drew out a thin silver chain. A small medallion hung from it, worn smooth at the edges. Matteo was 26, Antonio said. He believed he could negotiate peace. His thumb moved over the medallion. He arranged a private meeting with Gideon Vale, who represented the Morettas before he became legitimate enough for magazine covers. Matteo brought no weapons. He brought financial documents proving Vale had been stealing from both families. "What happened?" "They sent my brother home in pieces." Claire's breath stopped. Antonio's face remained calm. Only his hand betrayed him, tightening around the medallion until his knuckles whitened. "My father had taught us that hospitality created loyalty," he continued. Matteo offered Vale wine before the meeting. The bottle was returned with his body. Claire understood then. His contempt for gifts. His belief that generosity created debt. The wound beneath his control. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I do not require sympathy. Everyone requires sympathy. I have survived without it. Surviving isn't the same as living." His gaze lifted to hers. The silence between them changed. Antonio approached the table. Claire remained seated as he stopped before her. He looked down at her, powerful enough to frighten cities, yet carrying a dead brother's medallion beneath his shirt like an unfinished prayer. "Why do you insist on seeing what I have buried?" he asked. "Because you keep coming here. For cheese." "Liar." The word hung between them. Antonio's eyes dropped to her lips. Claire's pulse pounded. He leaned closer, one hand settling on the table beside her. "Be careful," he murmured. "Is that a threat?" "No." His face was inches from hers. "It is the last warning I have the strength to give you." Claire should have moved. Instead, she whispered, "About what?" "About making me want things I cannot possess safely." The air left her lungs. His gaze traveled across her face with restrained hunger. Then he stepped back. The loss of his warmth felt immediate. "Sleep," he said. "My men will remain outside." "And you?" Antonio put on his coat. "I will speak to your brother." Claire stood. "You will not hurt him." "That depends on him, Antonio." He stopped at the door. She crossed the kitchen and stood before him. "If you hurt Daniel, whatever this is between us ends before it begins." The words surprised them both. Antonio looked down at her. His face revealed nothing, but his voice changed. "So you believe something has begun?" Claire's cheeks warmed. "I believe you understand me." "No," he said softly. "But I am beginning to understand what I would destroy to keep you looking at me this way." Then he left. Daniel arrived the next morning with a split lip and Antonio beside him. Claire rushed across the yard. "What did you do?" Antonio looked insulted. "I did not touch him." Daniel avoided her eyes. "What happened to your face?" "I fell." Antonio's lieutenant coughed into his hand. Claire looked between them. Daniel finally sighed. I tried to hit him. You tried to hit Antonio Ricci? I had a difficult night. Claire slapped Daniel. The sound cracked across the cold yard. Her brother stared at her. Tears filled Claire's eyes. You took their money. Daniel looked away. I was going to fix it. You were going to testify against the farm. No. I was going to convince you to sell before they destroyed everything. This is everything. This is debt, Claire. Broken equipment, sick cows, freezing mornings, and Mom's hospital bills. Dad left us a legacy that eats money faster than we can earn it. He left us a home. He left you a prison. Claire flinched. Antonio shifted behind Daniel, but Claire raised a hand to stop him. You don't get to decide what my life means. I was trying to save you. You betrayed me. Daniel's face broke. I thought if North Star bought the valley, at least everyone would be paid. Vale promised local jobs, new facilities, debt forgiveness. Vale is Mafia. Daniel's eyes moved toward Antonio. I know that now. When did you learn? Last night, when 3 men pulled me into a parking garage because I told Vale I was withdrawing. Claire went cold. Daniel touched his bruised mouth. Antonio's people intervened. Claire looked at Antonio. He stood with snow gathering on his dark hair, his expression remote. You saved him. He belongs to you. Daniel stared at Antonio. That was also the reason he didn't break my hands. Claire closed her eyes briefly. What do we do now? Antonio answered. You leave. She turned to him. No. The farm is exposed. Vale believes Daniel gave me information. Moretti forces are moving north. This is my home. It is no longer defensible. You have 20 armed men here, and Vale has more. Then why are you still standing in my yard? His eyes darkened. Because I knew you would refuse. He had prepared a safe house in the Green Mountains, 30 miles from the farm. Claire resisted until Antonio showed her surveillance photographs of unfamiliar men near the local elementary school, the feed store, and 3 neighboring farms. Vale was not targeting only her. He intended to frighten the entire valley. Claire agreed to leave on one condition. The elderly Dailies, the young Mercer family, and 7 other local farming households had to receive protection. Antonio stared at the list she gave him. You are negotiating with me? Yes. While your life is threatened? Especially then. You are impossible. And yet, you keep returning. His Chaza held hers. All right. Everyone on the list. Yes. They're animals too. Antonio closed his eyes. Claire, the Dailies have 42 cows. I am aware. The Mercers have goats. I have intelligence reports on the goats. Despite the danger, Claire nearly smiled. Antonio saw it. Something in his expression softened for half a heartbeat. Then he turned to his lieutenant. Secure every name on the list. Families, homes, livestock, equipment. His lieutenant stared at the paper. Boss, this is an agricultural evacuation. Then find men who understand tractors. By sunset, the quiet valley looked like a military operation. Black SUVs escorted livestock trailers through the snow. Armed men in Italian coats carried feed bags and argued with stubborn goats. Antonio stood beside Claire's barn, while one of his most intimidating soldiers attempted to coax an elderly Jersey cow into a transport vehicle. The cow refused. Claire folded her arms. She doesn't like being ordered. Antonio looked at her. I have noticed that trait in Vermont females. Claire climbed into the trailer and held out an apple. The cow followed immediately. Antonio watched with narrowed eyes. Do not say it, he warned. I wasn't going to. You were. Everyone gets a sample. For the first time. Antonio Ricci laughed. It was quiet and brief, but every man in the yard turned to stare. The safe house was not a house. It was a secluded stone estate built into the mountainside, with heated floors, bullet-resistant windows, a private medical room, and an underground garage containing enough weapons to invade a small country. Claire stood in the enormous kitchen. This is where you hide? This is where other people fail to find me. Do you own anything normal? Antonio removed his coat. I own a toaster. She opened a cabinet. Inside were 12 identical black coffee cups and no plates. You own a depressing toaster. Forced proximity proved more dangerous than gunfire. Claire was given a bedroom overlooking frozen pines. Antonio stayed across the hall. His men occupied the lower level and monitored the valley through encrypted feeds. During the day, Claire coordinated with farmers by phone and helped arrange temporary housing for displaced families. At night, she found Antonio awake. He worked at the kitchen island until dawn, studying financial records, satellite images, and North Star ownership structures. Sometimes he removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves to the elbow, exposing old scars along his forearms. On the third night, Claire entered the kitchen carrying a wooden box. Antonio looked up. "What is that?" "Emergency supplies." She opened it. 4 cheeses rested inside, packed before they left the farm. Antonio stared at them. "You evacuated cheese during an armed threat. They're reserve wheels. You left clothing behind. Clothing doesn't require 18 months to mature." Claire cut samples and placed them on a board. Antonio leaned back. "We are alone. I'm aware. There is no line. You still don't skip the samples." His gaze moved from the cheese to her face. Something heated in the silence. Claire offered him a toothpick. He accepted it without argument. They tasted a washed rind cheese aged in hard cider. Antonio considered it. "Too strong. You said that about the blue. The blue was aggressive. This is hostile. It would pair well with the Barolo you keep locked downstairs." His eyes sharpened. "How do you know about that?" "Your kitchen manager told me." "I do not have a kitchen manager." "Then one of your armed criminals is extremely knowledgeable about wine." Antonio's mouth almost curved. Claire gave him the next sample, a soft, bloomy rind cheese with black truffle. He tasted it. "This one is dangerous. It's cheese. It encourages poor judgment." Their eyes met. The room became very quiet. Claire set down the knife. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? You would have refused to serve me." "No, I wouldn't. You were frightened when you discovered my identity. I was cautious. You locked the door after I left." She stared at him. "You knew?" "I was watching the property." "That still sounds terrible." It was terrible. It was also effective. Claire moved around the island, gathering crumbs. Antonio caught her wrist. The contact stopped them both. His thumb rested against her pulse. He had touched her before, to protect or steady her. This was different. Deliberate. Claire looked down at his hand, and then up at him. "You should let go." "Yes." He did not. His eyes held hers with frightening focus. "Antonio, I have spent my entire life taking what other men were too weak to defend." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. "I know. I have never stood in line for anything. I noticed. I returned because you denied me. That sounds unhealthy. I returned because you treated me like everyone else." Claire's breath caught. Antonio's thumb moved once over her wrist. "No one has done that since I was a boy." The confession entered the room like a wound. Claire stepped closer. "You could try being an ordinary man more often." "I am not an ordinary man." "No." Her free hand lifted to his chest. His body went still beneath her palm. "But you're still a man." Antonio's control broke in his eyes first. His hand slid from her wrist to her waist. He drew her between his knees where he sat at the island. Claire felt the strength of him, the heat beneath his shirt, the dangerous restraint in every muscle. His gaze moved to her mouth. "If I kiss you," he said, "I will not forget it. I wasn't asking you to. You do not understand." "Then explain." "I will want to know where you are every minute. I will want every door guarded, every man near you investigated, every threat removed before you hear its name." "That isn't love." "No." His fingers tightened at her waist. "It is what happens before love, when a man like me has not yet learned the difference between devotion and possession." Claire's heart pounded painfully. "And do you want to learn?" His expression changed. "Yes." She kissed him. For 1 second, Antonio did not move. Then his hand rose to the back of her neck, and he kissed her with all the hunger he had restrained for months. It was not gentle, but it was careful. That contradiction undid her. His mouth claimed and questioned at once. Claire gripped his shoulders as he pulled her closer, his breath roughening for the first time she had ever heard. Then an alarm sounded. Antonio released her instantly. The warmth vanished from his face. He drew his gun before Claire could step back. His lieutenant's voice came over the security system. "Perimeter breach. 3 vehicles approaching from the south road." Antonio positioned Claire behind him. "Get her downstairs." "No." He turned. Claire, my people are scattered across this mountain because of me. I'm not hiding without knowing what's happening. You will do exactly that. You don't control me. His jaw clenched. This is not the moment. It never will be for you. Headlights swept across the windows. Antonio's men moved through the house. He looked at Claire with fury born entirely from fear. Then he took her hand and led her toward the underground command room instead of the bunker. Stay beside me, he ordered. That sounds almost like compromise. It is the closest you will receive tonight. The approaching vehicle stopped outside. On the security screens, Daniel stepped from the first SUV. His hands were raised. Gideon Vale emerged behind him. A gun pressed against Daniel's spine. Claire stopped breathing. Vale looked directly into the nearest camera and smiled. Antonio, he called. I brought the family home. Gideon Vale entered the estate under a flag of negotiation. He was silver-haired, handsome, and polished enough to appear trustworthy on magazine covers. Snow melted across the shoulders of his camel-colored coat. Daniel stood beside him, pale and furious. 6 Moretti soldiers waited outside with rifles. Antonio faced Vale in the main hall. Claire remained at his side despite his objections. Vale's eyes traveled over her. So this is the cheesemaker. Antonio stepped slightly in front of her. Vale smiled. I expected someone more fragile. That has been a common disappointment, Claire said. Antonio glanced at her, half warning and half admiration. Vale removed his gloves. I'm here to end an unnecessary conflict. North Star will increase its purchase offer by 20%. Every farmer who signs will receive relocation assistance. You poisoned our land samples, Claire said. An unfortunate administrative error. You threatened families. Independent contractors exceeded their authority. You put a knife through a dead animal on my doorstep. Vale's smile remained. Rural negotiations are emotional. Antonio's voice became soft. You should be careful. Vale looked at him. You once had patience, Antonio. Before your little brother lost his head, every man in the hall reached for a weapon. Antonio did not move. That was more frightening. Claire felt the violence gather around him like pressure before a storm. She touched his hand. His fingers closed around hers. Vale noticed. Interest sharpened his smile. Oh, he murmured. It is serious. Antonio's expression remained blank. Vale turned to Claire. Do you know how many women have disappeared because men mistook Antonio's silence for affection? Claire looked at Antonio. For the first time, uncertainty cut through her trust. Vale continued. Did he tell you about Sofia Bellini? Antonio's grip tightened. Enough. His fiancée, Vale explained. Beautiful woman. Political family. She vanished 2 weeks before their wedding. Claire's stomach tightened. Antonio? She betrayed my family. That wasn't my question. Vale's smile widened. Nobody was ever found. Antonio looked only at Claire. Sophia sold the location of my brother's meeting to Vale. Daniel swore under his breath. Claire felt cold spread through her. What happened to her? I sent her out of the country. Vale laughed. That is the elegant version. Is it true? Claire asked. Antonio's silence became unbearable. Then he answered. Yes. You had her killed. No. Where is she? Switzerland. Vale's smile vanished. Antonio's lieutenant placed a folder on the table. Inside were recent photographs of a woman living beside a lake with 2 children. Vale stared. You protected her, Claire whispered. I removed her from my life. She helped murder your brother. She was pregnant. Antonio's face hardened. The child was not responsible. Claire saw him differently then. Not innocent. Never that. But not the monster Vale wanted her to see. Antonio had spared a traitor because an unborn child stood between vengeance and mercy. Vale looked furious. You always were sentimental beneath the theater. Antonio's voice lowered. And you always mistook mercy for weakness. The lights went out. Gunfire erupted from outside. Antonio pulled Claire to the floor as windows shattered. His men returned fire. Vale lunged toward Daniel. Claire grabbed the heavy wooden sample box she had carried from the farm and swung it into Vale's face. He staggered. Antonio's lieutenant tackled him. Emergency lights flooded the hall in red. Antonio dragged Claire behind a stone pillar. Are you hurt? No. You struck an armed Mafia strategist with cheese. The box was oak, A bullet struck the pillar. Antonio stared at her as if deciding whether to kiss or strangle her. Then smoke poured from the lower corridor. His men shouted that the garage had been breached. Vale had not come to negotiate. He had come to mark the estate for attack. Antonio ordered an evacuation through the mountain tunnel. Claire, Daniel, and several guards were rushed underground while fighting spread through the house above. Halfway through the tunnel, Claire realized Antonio was no longer behind them. She stopped. Daniel grabbed her arm. "What are you doing? Where is he?" "He stayed." "Why?" Antonio's lieutenant avoided her eyes. "To seal the upper tunnel." The meaning hit her. If the attackers reached the passage, Antonio intended to collapse the entrance. With himself on the other side, Claire tore free. "Move." "Claire, no." She seized the lieutenant's radio. "Antonio." Static answered. "Antonio, answer me." Gunfire crackled through the speaker. Then his voice came. "Keep moving. You're coming with us. The tunnel must be sealed manually. Then seal it and run. There is not enough time." Claire's throat closed. "You don't get to decide this alone. I have decided everything alone for 20 years. And look where it brought you." Silence. Claire's eyes burned. "You told me you wanted to learn the difference between devotion and possession." His breathing came faintly over the radio. "Yes. Then listen to me. Devotion means coming back. It means trusting someone else to help carry the weight. It means you don't get to die just because sacrifice is easier than hope." The tunnel shook from an explosion. Dust rained from the ceiling. Antonio's voice returned. Rougher now. "Claire." "What?" "I should have kissed you again." Her tears fell. "You still can." Another silence. Then Antonio spoke to his lieutenant. "Secondary detonator. Delay 7 minutes." The man stared at the radio. "Boss, that route is exposed. Do it." A steel door opened farther down the tunnel, revealing a secondary path toward the ridge. 3 minutes later, Antonio appeared through the smoke. Blood marked his temple. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. Claire ran to him. He caught her against his body. For one breath, the Mafia boss forgot his men were watching. His face pressed into her hair. His arms tightened around her with something close to desperation. Then the mountainside exploded behind him. The tunnel entrance collapsed. Antonio did not release her. "You came back," Claire whispered. "You ordered me to. I thought you didn't take orders." His mouth touched her forehead. "Only yours." The Moretti attack changed the war. Antonio's mountain estate was destroyed, but Gideon Vale was captured alive. From a temporary safe house in Boston, Antonio began dismantling North Star. Claire watched the process from inside a world she had never imagined. Private investigators uncovered falsified environmental reports. Accountants traced offshore payments. Journalists received anonymous evidence connecting North Star to bribery, intimidation, and illegal land transfers. But legitimate exposure alone was not enough. The Moretti family still controlled witnesses, inspectors, and local officials. Antonio prepared a different solution. He would trade Vale to federal prosecutors in exchange for protection for the Vermont farmers. Claire discovered the arrangement by accident. She entered Antonio's office late one night and found documents spread across his desk. One page bore his name beneath the heading "Cooperating Individual." She looked at him. "What is this?" Antonio closed the door. "A contingency. You're giving the government evidence against the Morettis." "Yes." "And against yourself?" His silence answered. Claire's heart dropped. "What will happen to you?" "That depends on how generous the Justice Department feels." "How long?" "Possibly 15 years." She stared at him. "No. Vale's testimony alone will not protect the valley. The Morettis own too many intermediaries. My records can destroy their financial structure." "And yours?" "Yes. You're surrendering your empire. It has served its purpose." "Since when?" "Since I found something more valuable." Claire looked away, fighting tears. "You don't get to make yourself a martyr. This is not martyrdom. It feels like punishment." Antonio moved closer. "Perhaps it is." "For what?" "For every family that lost a son because I refused to end a war. For every man who became loyal to me because fear was easier to earn than love. For every time I believed power could protect what humanity could not." Claire pressed the documents against his chest. "And what happens to us?" His control faltered. "You return to Vermont." "That isn't what I asked." "You rebuild your farm." "Antonio, You stand behind that wooden counter and force arrogant men to taste cheese they did not request. Hettier Spillel. And you? He touched her cheek. I remember you. Anger rose through her grief. She slapped him. His head turned slightly. The guards outside the office went silent. Antonio looked back at her. Claire's voice shook. You don't get to call abandonment devotion. I am trying to keep you safe. You are trying to control the ending because you're terrified I might choose you knowing exactly what you are. His eyes darkened. You should not. But I do. You have seen fragments. I've seen enough. No. Antonio's voice sharpened. You have seen restraint. You have not seen what I became after Matteo died. Men begged me for their lives. I listened and felt nothing. Claire stepped closer. And now? His expression twisted with something raw. Now I hear you cry in the next room and cannot breathe. The confession broke them both. Claire put her hands against his face. Antonio closed his eyes. I am not asking you to excuse the man you were, she whispered. I am asking whether you're brave enough to become someone else without using prison as an escape. His eyes opened. The government requires leverage. Give them Vale. Give them the Moretti accounts. Give them North Star. Give them enough of your operation to make the case. They will demand more. Then negotiate. A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. You make it sound simple. You told me everything is a negotiation. Antonio looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her against him and kissed her with a desperation that made every previous touch feel restrained. His hands framed her face. Claire held him as the feared leader of the Ricci family finally admitted, without words, that he did not want to leave her. When they separated, Antonio rested his forehead against hers. I do not know how to be the man you deserve. Start by not making decisions for both of us. That will be difficult. I know. I may fail. I know. His thumb brushed away her tears. And, if the federal agreement collapses, then we fight it together. Antonio stared at her. No one had ever offered him together without demanding obedience. His voice became quiet. I love you. Claire's breath caught. The words seemed to frighten him. He continued before he could stop. I love your impossible farm, your terrible financial decisions, your refusal to accept special treatment. I love that you give food to strangers and believe goodness remains a gift even when the world punishes it. He swallowed. I love that you stood in a collapsing tunnel and ordered me to live. Claire smiled through tears. I love you too. Antonio kissed her forehead. Then he reached for the federal agreement. All right, he said. We negotiate. The agreement took 12 days. Antonio surrendered control of 3 ports, exposed 7 Moretti officials, and provided evidence against Gideon Vale and North Star Agricultural Holdings. In return, he received limited immunity for financial crimes tied directly to the investigation, though he remained under federal supervision. His legitimate companies survived. His criminal empire did not. Some of his captains saw reform as betrayal. One man in particular refused to accept it. Salvatore Ricci, Antonio's uncle, had helped raise him after his father's death. He believed the family's power mattered more than legality, peace, or love. Salvatore disappeared before federal agents could question him. Antonio knew immediately where he would go. Vermont. Claire returned to Whitmore farm under protection as soon as North Star's land purchases were suspended. The valley celebrated cautiously. Farmers came home. Animals returned to their barns. Orders resumed. For the first time in months, the tasting room opened. Claire stood behind the counter beneath newly replaced windows. A line formed before 10. Mrs. Daly brought pies. The Mercers brought their daughter, who had made Antonio a crayon drawing of a cow wearing sunglasses. At 11:15, the brass bell above the door rang. Antonio entered. No armored convoy. No 6 bodyguards. Only one dark SUV and his lieutenant, who remained outside. Antonio wore a black coat and a charcoal suit. The room became silent. Claire placed 4 samples on the board. You're late. Federal supervision has made my schedule inefficient. End of the line. Several locals looked horrified. Antonio glanced at the 23 people waiting. Then he walked to the back. The room exhaled. By the time he reached Claire, snow had begun falling outside. She offered the first sample. Fresh cheddar. He tasted it. Acceptable. Cave, aged blue. Aggressive. Cider wash at Tum. Hostile. Claire smiled. And Alpine Reserve. Antonio tasted the final cheese. His gaze remained on her. Perfect. The lights went out. Claire's smile vanished. The front door locked automatically. Antonio's hand moved beneath his coat. A voice came from the cellar stairs. Still standing in line for scraps, nephew? Salvatore Ricci emerged with a gun. 2 armed men stepped from the storage room. Customers screamed. Antonio moved in front of Claire. Salvatore shook his head. Look at you. Destroying generations of power for a woman who smells like a barn. Antonio's voice became dangerously calm. You have 10 seconds to lower the weapon. You surrendered our ports. 9. You gave family records to prosecutors. 8. You traded blood for farmers. 7. Salvatore aimed at Claire. Antonio stopped counting. The room changed. Claire felt the cold violence return to him. Not the reckless rage she had feared. Something controlled, protective, absolute. Salvatore smiled. There he is. Antonio's hand remained near his coat. You believe killing her will restore the family. It will restore you. No, Antonio said. It will end you. A gunshot exploded. Antonio threw Claire behind the counter. The bullet struck his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Customers dropped to the floor. Antonio drew his pistol and fired at the lights above Salvatore, showering the gunman with sparks and glass. Claire crawled toward the emergency bell beneath the register. One of Salvatore's men saw her. He raised his weapon. Mrs. Daly hurled an entire apple pie into his face. The gunman stumbled. Mr. Daly struck him with a wooden chair. Antonio's lieutenant crashed through the front door as armed security surrounded the building. Salvatore ran toward the cellar. Claire knew the underground corridors better than anyone. He's going to the aging room. Antonio pressed one hand to his bleeding shoulder. Stay here. She grabbed his coat. No. Claire. He'll reach the lower loading tunnel. Antonio's men entered the tasting room. Claire pointed toward the exterior barn doors. Send them around. The tunnel exits by the east pasture. Antonio looked at her. Then he nodded. Together, they descended into the cellar. Rows of cheese wheels towered in the cool stone chambers. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the shelves. Salvatore's footsteps echoed ahead. Antonio moved silently despite his wound. Claire stayed behind him until they reached the oldest chamber beneath the original barn. Salvatore stood near the support controls. In one hand, he held a gun. In the other, a detonator. You always did inherit your mother's weakness, he told Antonio. Antonio positioned himself between Salvatore and Claire. My mother had compassion. She made your father weak. My father died because men like you mistook cruelty for strength. Salvatore's thumb rested on the switch. This cellar collapses. The farm ends. Claire looked around. 18 months of aging inventory surrounded them. Nearly every dollar the farm possessed. Her father's final wheel rested on the center shelf. Antonio saw where she was looking. Salvatore smiled. Choose, nephew, the woman or her precious legacy. Antonio did not hesitate. He turned, seized Claire around the waist, and drove both of them behind a stone divider. The explosion tore through the cellar. Shelves collapsed. Cheese wheels shattered across the floor. Dust and stone filled the air. Antonio covered Claire completely. When the ceiling stopped falling, she heard him breathing against her hair. Are you hurt? No. She touched his face. Antonio, I am here. Behind them, Salvatore coughed. He had survived the blast, but lay trapped beneath a wooden beam. His gun rested several feet away. Antonio Rose. He walked toward his uncle. Claire saw the decision in his posture. Salvatore saw it too. Do it, he rasped. Prove you're still a Ricci. Antonio picked up the gun. He aimed it. The cellar became silent. Claire did not tell him to stop. This choice had to belong to him. Antonio stared at the man who had taught him that mercy was weakness. Then he lowered the weapon. No, he said. I will prove I am no longer your version of one. Federal agents entered through the eastern tunnel minutes later. Salvatore was arrested alive. Antonio returned to Claire. Dust covered his dark hair. Blood soaked his shoulder. Behind him, the cellar lay ruined. Claire looked at the broken shelves and scattered wheels. Years of work were gone. Antonio touched her cheek. I'm sorry. She leaned into his hand. You saved me. I destroyed your legacy. No, Claire looked toward the shattered final wheel her father had made. A crack ran through its center. She knelt beside it and broke away a small piece. Then she held it out to Antonio. He stared at the sample. Now? Especially now. He accepted it. The flavor was sharp, nutty, and touched by smoke from the blast. Antonio swallowed. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Well? He looked at the ruined cellar, the armed agents, and the woman who had taught him that a gift did not create weakness. It tastes like survival. 1 year later, Whitmore Family Creamery reopened its expanded tasting room. The rebuilding had become a valley-wide effort. Farmers whose land had been saved donated timber, stone, labor, and milk. Restaurants prepaid for future orders. Families from across New England visited after hearing how a small Vermont community had resisted one of the largest agricultural corporations in the country. North Star was dissolved. Gideon Vale received a federal sentence that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Daniel surrendered his North Star payment, completed a gambling recovery program, and became legal counsel for the newly formed White River Farmers Cooperative. Antonio changed too. His legitimate shipping company created a protected distribution network for independent farms. He refused ownership shares. He accepted only enough repayment to keep the system operating. When reporters asked why Antonio Ricci, once feared in ports from Boston to Montreal, had become the financial protector of rural farmers, he gave no interviews. Claire knew the answer. Generosity had once meant danger to him. Now it meant choosing to give without demanding possession in return. On the creamery's reopening day, visitors filled the bright wooden room. Children crowded around sample boards. Elderly farmers drank cider near the windows. Snow sparkled across the fields beneath pale winter sunlight. Claire stood behind the counter in a cream dress and her familiar green apron. Her curves were no longer something she tried to hide behind loose sweaters. Antonio had never treated her body as an apology. He loved every softness with a reverence that made her feel powerful rather than merely desired. At 11:15 the bell rang. Antonio entered. He wore a tailored black suit and carried no visible weapon. A little girl ran toward him. Mr. Ricci. He crouched as she handed him a drawing of the rebuilt barn. Antonio accepted it with the solemn attention of a diplomatic document. Thank you, Isabella. Her mother looked stunned that he remembered the child's name. Antonio remembered every person Claire cared about. That was the danger of his devotion. It had not become smaller. It had become disciplined. He joined the tasting line. Claire watched him wait behind tourists, farmers, and a family counting coins to purchase a small wedge of cheddar. When the family reached the counter, Claire quietly placed extra cheese in their bag. Antonio noticed. He did not attempt to pay. He only smiled. Finally, he stood before her. Claire arranged 4 samples. You know the rules. I have memorized them. She handed him the first cheese. A young cheddar made after the farm's reopening. He tasted it. Hopeful. Claire blinked. That's new. The cheese is young. So were you, once. I have seen no reliable evidence. She gave him the second sample. Maple smoked Gouda. Restrained, he said. The third? He tested the cider wash at Tom. Still hostile. Claire laughed. The sound warmed the entire room. Then she placed the final sample in front of him. It came from the first Alpine wheel aged in the reconstructed cellar. Antonio lifted the toothpick but did not taste it. Instead, he stepped around the counter. The room fell quiet. Antonio? He reached into his coat. Half the visitors instinctively moved away. Antonio withdrew a small wooden box. Then the former Mafia boss, still feared by powerful men, still watched by federal agents, still capable of turning cold enough to silence a room, lowered himself to one knee on the creamery floor. Claire stopped breathing. Inside the box rested an emerald-cut diamond set in a simple platinum band. Antonio looked up at her. For once, he had no prepared speech. She saw it in his eyes. He was afraid, not of rejection alone, of trusting joy. Before you, he said, I believed every gift created a debt. The room remained silent. You gave me food when I could have purchased the building. You gave me honesty when everyone else offered obedience. You gave me another life when I had done nothing to deserve one. Claire's vision blurred. Antonio continued, I cannot promise to become ordinary. A few farmers laughed softly. I cannot promise I will stop assigning security to every delivery route. You'd better, Claire whispered. I will reconsider the number. She laughed through tears. Antonio's expression softened. But I promise, I will never again confuse loving you with owning you. I will stand beside you when you ask, behind you when you need strength, and in line when you have samples. The crowd laughed. His voice lowered. Claire Whitmore, will you marry me? She looked at the man kneeling before her. Once, people had stepped aside when Antonio Ricci entered a room. Now he waited. He asked. He trusted her answer. Claire took the final alpine sample from the board. Antonio stared at it. Claire. Everyone tastes before receiving special service. His eyes closed briefly. She placed the cheese against his lips. He tasted it. Well? She asked. Antonio looked at her with every wall gone. Worth waiting for. Claire held out her hand. Yes. The room erupted. Antonio slid the ring onto her finger and rose. He wrapped his arms around her as neighbors, farmers, children, and former bodyguards applauded. Snow began falling beyond the windows. The valley remained independent. The barn stood strong. The cellar was full again. And in the middle of a tasting room where rich and poor received the same welcome, the most dangerous man Claire had ever known kissed her like she was not something he had conquered, but the only gift he had finally learned how to receive. Outside, a black SUV waited beside a mud-covered farm truck. Inside, a new line formed at the counter. Antonio reluctantly released Claire and looked toward the waiting customers. You have work. So do you. She handed him a tray of free samples. He stared at it. You want me to serve? Smile at people. Tell them what they're tasting. Try not to threaten anyone. I make no promises. Claire kissed his cheek. Antonio looked down at the tray, then at the room filled with people who no longer feared him quite as much as they once had. A little boy approached the counter. Are those free? Antonio looked at Claire. She nodded. He crouched and offered the child the first sample. Yes, Antonio said. The word came slowly, as though it still carried unfamiliar weight. They are a gift. And this time, he asked for nothing in return.